I think matches the sum total of all published data on this question up to date. So this is a really big meeting for you guys. And just to make it fun, their results are exactly the opposite of ours. So read into that whatever you want to. Talked about the roving interviews, going from section to section. Talk to as many people as we can. Clerk asks questions: how many fish did you caught? How many did you keep? When did you start? So you get their starting time, you get their catch rate, harvest rate, based on the portion of the trip that took place prior to them being intercepted, based on those questions. We then gave those anglers a postcard and asked them to fill that out for what they caught during the remainder of the trip after the interview and mail it in so we could get the complete trip data for the same anglers, which is entirely different and probably better than just comparing one random population to another as we've done in the past. So we had the postcards numbered so we could assign them to specific anglers. We filled out our work with human subjects approval permit form for Cornell so we could collect name and address information, because we also had a prize drawing. Some postcards you got nothing if you turned it back. Others you were entered into a raffle for $100, $200, or $400. DC's money, we can be as generous as we could. So some assumptions of this design is anglers given postcards are representative of all the anglers on the lake. We have to just take that as a fact. There's boats on the water, the clerk's out there. He is instructed to interview people, not get too hooped up about the open water walleye guys or the nearshore bass guys, trying to be representative. The other assumption that's a little harder to get at but has the most implications: we know not all postcards can be returned, but we're assuming the ones that do come back are representative of all the anglers who got the cards in the first place. And there's not some bias introduced by the fact that some anglers decide I'm going to mail my card back and some decide I'm not. We also have recall bias. If they take a long time to send the card back, their memories tend to be malleable. We caught more fish. It's kind of like after you drink a lot of beer, the longer it goes after you drink the beer, the fewer beers you remember drinking. Back then, angling works the other way. For the most part, our guys did pretty good. Average return card of postcards was 3 days, but we had some folks wait till 163 days later to mail the card back. And one who got it back to us the same day he got it, I don't recall how that happened exactly. We also have to worry about prestige bias. That anglers may elevate what their catch was. But I don't know any studies that indicate anglers are not strictly honest when they talk about their experiences out there, so we're not going to worry about that one too much. But we are worried about, are the return cards representative of all anglers we're getting to? This is pretty much what the distribution of catch rates across Oneida's anglers looks like. It is in fact true that 80-90% of all the fish are caught by 10% of the fishermen. The vast majority of our anglers don't do that well. Their catch rates are quite low, and then a subset who really know what they're doing catch a whole lot of fish. So what we're worried about with this postcard comparison is that the cards will come back to people who catch fish, either because they like bragging, or the people who don't catch fish say, well, they're not going to get information from my card because I didn't catch anything after I talked to them. And we wind up with card sampling a more successful part of the population than what we gave them to in the first place. So we decided to compare the catch rates at time of interview between the cards that came back and the cards that didn't. So we have the information on everybody who got a card. We have the information on the guys who sent cards back. We can look at whether or not there's some reason to think that only successful anglers sent cards back. And I know if you're more than about 3 people away, you're not going to be able to see this, but that's a good thing because the lines are pretty much on top of each other. The catch rate, the cards came back from people pretty much at the same catch rate population as they were given out to. No indication that people who weren't catching fish were less likely to send cards back, or people who were more likely to. That's for walleye anglers, yellow perch, and bass guys, pretty much the same thing. So in as much as we can test it, we think the postcards that were returned are representative of the anglers that we gave them to. We did the Vibe test, also known as Kolmogorov-Smirnoff, comparing the distribution of catch rates between cards, 261 that returned, 292 that were not, and saw no difference whatsoever, again suggesting that the cards came back from a random sample of people who got cards. We also saw incentive stealth. Return rates are actually quite good, average over 50%, but as you increase the raffle prize they're eligible for, the return rate went up. It wasn't a whole lot of money. You're talking $700 for that much data. It's even less money when you take into account the fact that it wasn't ours. but it does look like it helps if you offer people some kind of prize. And we saw no indication that there was any difference between who did and didn't decide to turn back a card based on whether there was a prize. There's always that risk that the $0 guys will have a bigger difference, and the big money will draw out everybody. But we, again, saw really good agreement between who did and didn't send back cards based on catch rates. So that's all just to say, well, I hope you trust these results. I see that the trout people have Ken Pollock as a co-author. I talked to Ken about our study over beers at AFS meeting years ago, but he's not a co-author, so I'll be interested to see what he thinks of the approach here. And it turns out, surprisingly enough, we did see differences in complete and incomplete catch rates. Remember, these are the same anglers. This isn't some random sample, but in all cases, complete trip catch rates were higher, and statistically so, than incomplete trip rates, meaning that the data we had from incomplete trip interviews, the roving survey, which is what we normally use, would generate a lower catch rate estimate than what we got from the complete trip data. And harvest rates turned out the same way except for bass. Bass, as you know, tend not to be a harvest fishery because you go straight to hell if you kill a bass, so they're not going to do it, and you're not going to see any difference there. But for the most part, we saw differences. The one other study that I've seen was the other way around. Incomplete trips were higher. I'm not trying to steal any punchlines, but I believe that's the way the trout stuff went too. So I guess with a total of 3 or 4 papers, we don't know yet. How come this happens? Who knows? When the incomplete trip data are higher than complete trip, you might assume that anglers fish until they go through a prolonged dry spell and catching, and they quit. That's going to bias the complete trip catch rates down relative to what you get in the mid-fishing trip. For harvest species like walleye and yellow perch, people might quit when they catch their limit. You're going to bias complete trip catch rates up if they end right after catching the fish. Those are possible explanations, neither of which is probably true, but neither of which is refutable, so that we can throw them out there at will. But nonetheless, keep in mind, when we have random samples of complete and incomplete, we don't see a difference on a data. When we do it with exactly the same angler population, we do see a difference. Not at all sure what that means. So those are some components of Creel design, what it costs, your choices. Some are more expensive than others. Some generate data that are considered to be more reliable than others. A fair amount of noise and variance across them. What do you do if you're an agency who really wants to know how the fishing's going so they know what their clientele are experiencing, or need to know what harvest rates are so they can manage for sustainable populations? And this is where the fact that I really don't know anything about Creel surveys is going to impair the quality of this talk, because I don't know that I have any advice. We found no compelling reason to buck the conventional wisdom. Instantaneous counts tend to be better. Complete trip interviews are better. I would not disagree that instantaneous counts are better when you can do them, but not all systems are conducive to instantaneous counts. They're particularly good when you have a system whose primary use is fishing. If you start cluttering up the lake with people who aren't fishing, there might actually be an argument to make that progressive counts are better because you're closer to the fishermen and the non-fishermen, and you can parse out who's who. Logistics will always determine what we do and take into account how important is the effort thing. If all you're trying to do is see whether or not fishing is going up in the system because we started stocking such and such, or fishing is going down in this area because we quit stocking such and such, it may not be that critical that your effort data be entirely accurate. Just if they're consistent from year to year so that you're capturing a trend. If your objective is to estimate harvest estimate, or harvest breaks, or total harvest, your effort data needs to be accurate because you're using that to determine how many fish are taken out of the lake. So bear in mind what it is you're using the effort data for when you decide how closely you want to stick to the conventional approaches. Complete trip, rate data collected, all the data trip are certainly the most accurate. It's hard to argue with that. There's no assumptions involved with that other than that anglers are by and large honest, and we know that's true. We have not seen consistent differences in rates estimated from roving and access area surveys when we're talking about different portions of the population. But we did have that postcard survey, and, well, who knows what that means. Do need to be a little bit careful about demographic differences in diffuse access fisheries, or sampling different portions of the population of anglers out there if you have a lake where only a fraction of your anglers are obligated to use boat ramps. And this is true. We can get all the people up here lecturing about how to do a Creel survey properly if we want to. We had Ken Lockwood, I think, give a workshop at DEC several years ago that Scott and I went to. Scott remembered it and did this stuff. I don't remember much about that at all. And yet I'm the one here talking. We have to do what we have to do. And we have, you know, the priorities are what they are, logistics are what they are. We just do the best we can. The last question I want to approach is, are there any shortcuts? So we can't seem to get around the fact that a good survey is an expensive survey. Is there any shortcuts we can do to maybe cut some corners or save some money some way other than this counting and effort estimate? Our walleye season runs at least 5 months, first Saturday of May through September, October. So if we want to survey our walleye population, our traditional Creel approach requires 5 months of clerk time, full-time work, working weekends, counting boats, talking to anglers. That's not cheap. So we have 6 years of data where we had complete season data, and we knew we could take subsets of that, just a couple of months out of those 5, and see if there was any way to develop a predictive relationship between a shorter part of the season with Creel survey that would accurately predict the entire season catch rates. And it turned out there was. So here we have the full season, the data we get from 5 months of Creel clerk time out there. Here we have data just from June and July. We didn't play a lot with our data to find this June and July relationship. In fact, we didn't play at all. We picked June and July because that's our undergraduate summer intern season. Summer interns' priorities are getting good grad school recommendations, so they turn out to be very inexpensive and quite malleable and open-minded to what you tell them to do, because of course you're going to be writing recommendations for grad school. So we said, instead of hiring a full-time clerk, get whatever minimum wage is going to be in New York in a few years, we can hire an intern for potato chips and soda in 2 months a day to see how that works out. And this is pretty remarkable. I mean, that's a darn good relationship. We did it first in 6 years. I was hesitant to do it, but I went ahead and added last year's data to it because we had another full Creel year. And it actually improved the relationship, which for the DC folks, that's the first time that's ever happened. Usually I'll show them regression based on 4 or 5 points, sell them on the idea of funding us continuing to collect data that way, and then every subsequent year of data, the regression implodes. This one has stuck out for 1 year. We're not going to put any more points on there because why try to improve on that? So it looks like you can estimate catch rates with some accuracy with just a subset of data. For systems in the lake where there's been years and years of survey stuff, this opportunity exists. Don't change how you do the survey, but change the time frame you do it in and try to just predict what's going on the rest of the time. For catch rates, that's not that risky. For harvest, you're making a bigger assumption here. So the relationship for harvest rate, our R-squared went all the way down to 0.85. I'll still take that. You still have to estimate effort for the entire season if you're using these abbreviated survey types to get harvest rate. You can't estimate harvest or effort based on a subset, as we found. You can only do the rates. A little bit more surprising that this one works out. Catch rates on the lake aren't that variable most years. Harvest rates are. We have years here where the catch rates are quite high, the harvest is low because most of the fish were short, the big year class coming in, and other years where the harvest rate was very close to what the catch rate was. And the fact that this regression holds up like that is pretty encouraging that we can do that. So this is one efficiency I can offer, is there is potential to modify Creel surveys where you're not doing it the full season. Again, the take-home message here is we have to find what our logistical limitations are, work within those, do what we can afford. Creativity is good. This is my new favorite word. I'm not going to define it for anybody. You should go look it up on Google. Anosognosia is something that we all suffer from. At least my coworkers suffer from it in some fairly dramatic ways. But look that up. This will improve your vocabulary when you take your standardized test to get out of high school. You'll take that. And that's really all I have to offer. Not a very encouraging slide asking for questions, but if there are questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.